It's like an appendix, supplementary chapters. Because David has returned back to Jerusalem, his throne was established. Once again, he administered his kingship. He even had the cabinet members. Once again, he regained his ruling. It feels like 2 Samuel could have ended here. But from chapter 21 to 24, there are 6 passages as supplementary. 6 passages of scriptures, kind of like a supplementary information, so that we understand more about the ruling of David. And it put more colors to our understanding of David's ruling. So in chapter 2 passage in chapter 21 and 22-23, actually there are like psalms. One is the thanksgiving psalm of David. As he looked back his own whole life, he went through so many battles. He also went through the family tragedies. At the end, David wanted to give God a thanksgiving. So he wrote a psalm of thanksgiving. 2 Samuel chapter 22, the psalm recorded there, actually is Psalm 18. Not exactly 100% the same as Psalm 18, Psalm 18. Then in 2 Samuel chapter 23, it's divided into 2 paragraphs in chapter 23. The first paragraph, verse 1 to 7, was another psalm of David. And chapter 23, verse 1 here, now these are the last words of David. It's a psalm written by David. And then at the last of and the sweet psalmist of Israel, chapter 23, last verse. The sweet psalmist of Israel, it was David, obviously. This supplementary psalm of David recorded in chapter 23 is added on by the editor of and he called David as the sweet psalmist of Israel. It's a new name, new title given to David. Yes, all the psalms of David had been compiled together. And it also tells us how the achievements, military achievement of David. Now these are his last words. So to the editors and the writer of 2 Samuel, he called David the sweet psalmist of Israel. Only 7 verses in chapter 23. And then verse 8 to 39 of chapter 23 talk about how mighty, how strong David's mighty warriors were. The recording of these mighty men actually correspond to chapter 21, which we are going to read today. Verse 15 to 22. 15 to 22 talk about how mighty David's mighty men were. So in between that, 2 psalms, and then we have the before and after that, the mighty man of David. So David regained his ruling, and he fought the battle. They won the battle, and they ruled over all Israel. Not just by David himself. Many people, they risked their life to do this. And these are the list of the mighty men of David. And then also the right beginning. is verse 1 to 14 of chapter 21, which we are reading today. And also chapter 24, the last chapter of 2 Samuel. So these two chapters talk about there were famine, they were like a disaster happened in David's ruling. In chapter 21, we talk about a famine, a 3-year famine. Chapter 24 talk about 3 days plague. And at the end of these two chapters, verse 14 of 21, chapter 21, so they were going through famine, and it lasted 3 years. It lasted for 3 years, this famine, but because David did something, verse 14, and after that, God heeded the prayer for the land. God heeded the prayer for the land, and the famine stopped. And then the last chapter, the chapter 24, the last one, verse 25. So David did something. We'll read later on. So the Lord heeded the prayers for the land, and the plague was withdrawn from Israel. Verse 25 of chapter 24. These two chapters talk about David did something. Then the famine of 3 years stopped. And the second one, and then God heeded the prayer for the land. That's chapter 21. And then chapter 24, because David made a mistake. So God let him choose. Is it a plague of 3 days? It brought great casualties on the whole nation until David fell down before God and brought offering to the Lord. Then the Lord heeded the prayers for the land, and the plague was withdrawn from Israel. So David was made king. He was able to rule over the whole Israel. He needed to overcome a lot of difficulties. Maybe it's some of the consequences from Saul, previous generations. But then some are the mistakes he made as he was king. Even king makes mistakes. Reading the royal history of David, we know really well how David made mistakes. Absalom rose and brought civil war on Israel. Absalom. It was all the mistakes, all the faults of David. Today we read on the faults of Saul. And then chapter 24, David made another mistakes. But God protected this nation. Wherever the father is, there is covering. It doesn't mean that God just covers us with a big umbrella. When we make mistakes, it will be exposed. We need to admit our mistakes. We need to take action and then to recompensate for our actions. Chapter 21, verse 1 to 14, the first paragraph of this chapter is also, it will correspond to parallel to chapter 24. These 4 passages in these last 5 chapters is supplementary and to enrich the whole ruling of David. Verse 1, now there was a famine in the days of David for 3 years, year after year. And David inquired of the Lord. Verse 1, we don't know how David inquired of the Lord. But anyway, the Lord answered, it is because of Saul and his bloodthirsty house, because he killed Gibeonites. So we can think it very directly. So David inquired of the Lord, and then maybe there was a thought, there was an idea. The famine was caused by Saul, because he shed innocent blood, because he killed the Gibeonites. But I read some information that was quite interesting. If through the Urim and also Thummim of the priest that was in the Old Testament time to inquire of the Lord, the answer is either yes or no. It's close end. So how would David inquire of the Lord? Was this the sin of the people, or was it the sin of kings? That's how he may ask. Urim and Thummim. Was it the sin of people? No. Then he knew it was the sin of the kings. Then David, as king, he knew clearly how when a king makes mistakes, how it will brought trouble to the whole nations. So he continued to inquire, was it the sin of Saul as king, or was it the sin of me being king? The time. Then he realized that it was the sin of Saul when he was king. Then he asked few sins known to us about Saul. Was it that, he brought sacrifices without waiting for Samuel? Was it that time that, Lord, you are still angry about that? Then the Lord answered, no. Was it because he did not kill all the Amalekites as you commanded, Lord? And then God said, no. Was it because that, he went to Midian before he fought against the Philistines? And then God said, no. So what was the sin of Saul? One by one, rule out process of elimination. Then David realized that it was because Saul killed the Gibeonites. He was bloodthirsty and he killed the Gibeonites. Gibeonites are very special. Remember when Joshua was entering into the promised land, Joshua made a covenant with the Gibeonites. At the end, Joshua realized that actually the Gibeonites were Amorites living in the land of Gibeon. According to the command given by God to Joshua, Joshua should have killed all the Gibeonites. But because of the covenant Joshua made with Gibeonites, he must honor that covenant he made. Because God is between the two people making covenants. If we break the covenant, we betray God. We think there is a covenant between people. But we make the covenant before God, including marriage covenant, before God and before man. That's why Joshua cannot break the covenant he made. That's why the Ammonites or Amorites, or we call them Gibeonites, to become the woodcutter and also the servants. The servants of Israel, so that they may serve the Israelites. But this time, Saul, in his zeal for the children of Israel and Judah, he sought to kill them. You are the descendants of Amorites. Oh, you are Amorites, actually. But Joshua had made a covenant with them. This act was totally unnecessary. It's still under the protection of the covenant, under that vow. And God oversees the whole matters. That's why God was displeased, greatly displeased. The covenant we made, we must honor. Not just in words. God is a God of covenant. When David knew, then he called the Gibeonites and spoke to them. Verse 2. How do I make atonement for the sin? So that you may bless the inheritance of the Lord. Verse 3. Actually, the Gibeonites might bless the inheritance of the Lord. You know, the curses on the land is from the man's curse. When man blesses the land, the livelihood on the land will be blessed. So if we take people's inheritance, we rob it, and then after a few generations, you'll be fine. No, it didn't work that way. Because the land was cursed by man. Those who live on the land generation after generation will be affected by the curse. David wants to take away the curse, that you may bless the inheritance of the Lord. Verse 3. Even the Gibeonites may bless the inheritance of the Lord. They say it's not about silver or gold. Even with money, you cannot settle the matter. Actually, a lot of interpersonal disputes could not be settled by money. And the second thing, do not kill any man in Israel for us, or kill many people in Israel. So David asked further, whatever you say, I will do for you. Verse 4. So Saul was plotted against them that they should be destroyed from remaining in any of the territories of Israel. Verse 5. Now I remember book of Esther. People want to plot against the Jews so that they will be destroyed from remaining in the territories. We believe that the second Samuel was written in the time of exile. Or they returned to Israel. They face the same questions. Some people will want to destroy them from remaining in the territory. Haman want to kill them all, kill all the Jews. When they return, the Gentiles, the Samaritans want to drive all the Israelites out of the territories. That's why that story means a lot to the people in exile or people returning to Israel. What did the Gibeonites tell David? I want to tell you one concept. We read the story in the time of David and Saul, but it was written in the time of exile or returning. Two parallel but different historical time and space. The story happened in particular time and space, but it was written for the audience of people in exile and returning. Now we are at the third scenario, third setting of the story. When we read the scriptures, we are not in the time of David. We are not in the time of exile. It was about 500 years between the David's time and the people returning to Israel. Now we are 2021, so it's about 2,500 years. But right now we read this chapter, we still think the chapter is speaking to us. So we need to go back to the first setting. What happened in that thing? And then we go to the second setting in the exile, and the people returned. When the readers read it, what did they think? And then we come back to where we are now. When we read it now and then, what does it tell me? Now the first setting, the story happened. So the Gibeon asked David one thing. Let 7 men of his descendants be delivered to us, and we will hang them before the Lord in Gibeah of Saul, whom the Lord chose. Verse 6. It's not trying to take personal revenge. And it's not the hatred between just families. They would hang them before the Lord. They don't worry. Because the Lord God is a God of covenant, covenant keeper. God is the one who protects the whole Gibeonites and the territory. That's why they were able to do it before God. And what happened? So David went to find 7 men of Saul's descendants because he loves Jonathan. And he loved the son of Jonathan, Mephibosheth. So he spared Mephibosheth, the son of Jonathan. And then in verse 6, David brought, one is Ammonite, Rizpah, the concubine of Saul. 2 sons of Rizpah, concubines Saul. And also 5 sons of Michal, the daughter of Saul. It's a bit confusing when we even in the English translation, there are different. For the Chinese, it's the Micah's sisters. But then in English translation, we say it's the Micah, the daughter of Saul, the 5 sons of her. That's one of the English translation. So seven people. And what does it mean? Before the Lord. So it's done properly in some religious rituals. Not to assassinate, try to assassinate them, kill them in secret. They were not killed in secret. They were hanged on the hill before the Lord. Verse 9. And so they fell, all 7 together. It happened to the family of Haman in the book of Esther. Hanged in the gallows. Remember the story of the book of Esther? And then it was the first day in the beginning of barley harvest. It does sound familiar to us because that's the book of Ruth. In the first days, that's in the day of Pentecost. It was the famine of 3 years, year after year. As the 7 people took up the sin for his descendants, for their ancestors, then is the beginning of barley harvest. Verse 10 to 11, it was a touching record here. Now Rizpah, the daughter of Aiah, took sackcloth and spread it for herself on the rock, and to guard the bodies. She did not allow the birds of the air to rest on them by day, nor the beasts of the field by night. Verse 10. Nor the beasts of the field by night. Until the late rains pour on them from heaven. Here it says the late rain poured on them from heaven. So it talks about famine. 3 years, no rain. They live in this And once again, God cared for Israel again. So the Gibeonites blessed the land, the inheritance of the Lord, and then the rain came down again. So David was told what Rizpah, and then he took the opportunities. He went and took the bones of Saul and the bones of Jonathan, his son, from the men of Jabesh Gilead, who had stolen them from the streets of Bethshan. Verse 12. Because Jabesh Gilead had stolen them from the streets of Bashan. Because the Philistine had hung them up on the wall. But Saul was gracious to Jabesh Gilead before. That's why the mighty men of Jabesh Gilead went and stole the bodies of Saul and Jonathan back and buried it. So they would put the 7 men and then put them together with the bones of Saul and the bones of Jonathan. So they gathered the bones of those who had been hanged. So you can see that there are achievement as well as mistakes of Saul. He was kind to Jabesh Gilead. When the Ammonites threatened Jabesh Gilead, so Saul delivered them from that danger. So to the people of Jabesh Gilead, Saul was really kind, very gracious to them. That's how they stole the body back from the Philistines and buried them. So David took this opportunity and gathered the bones of those who had been hanged together. And they buried the soul bones of in the tomb of Kish, his father. Verse 14. We can see clearly how kind David was to the house of Saul, so that these 9 people who had been hanged will be able to bury together. The last verse in this paragraph. And after that, God heeded the prayer for the land. God heeded the prayer for the land. Rain came again. Is God willing to deliver us from plague, from adversity? But we must inquire of the Lord, and we must know what sin we have made. To Chinese, a comparatively mild sin to us, we think that it's okay not to keep our words. We despise integrity. It's okay if we don't do what we say. I will give you the most simple thing. The parents don't do what they promise their kids. Maybe sometimes the kids were nagging us, we couldn't be bothered, so we try to just appease them. We say something. When we say that, we don't mean it. We don't want to do it. But it will bring troubles. Then when the kids grow up, they think, oh, we don't need to keep our integrity. We don't have to do what we promised to do. But the father doesn't swear, as long as the Lord lives, I will do this. He didn't do that, right? The Chinese would say that the Cantonese say that your chin is too relaxed, so you just say whatever you like. Okay. It causes great tension in relationship. Where's it? When we get married, especially Christians' marriage, we invite all our friends and family. Many people happy for us. But the main thing about the wedding is to make covenant before the Lord. But if we break the marriage vow, it will cause a long-lasting effect. The person involved, our children will be deeply, greatly affected. When they were young, you couldn't tell, but they grow up, their reaction pattern, then we know. There are lots of things that the previous generation have not settled. May God help us. Integrity is crucial. And then in this story, it tells us that the sons will have to take up the consequences of their father's sin. We can't really understand. You know, you bear your own sins. My father made mistakes. Why am I bearing the consequences? It's a very individualized thinking. I finally come to understand one concept. It's an ecosystem concept. The father, the son, and the descendants live on the same land. When the father sins against the land, the land will not work for the sons and the descendants. It's not legal responsibilities here. Is that in the ecosystem aspect, we need to bear the consequences of our father's sin. We need to pray for the land. And we also pray for our ancestors and ask God to spare us from the disasters, from the adversities. So David did it because of the Rizpah, the kindness Rizpah, the daughter of Aiah. And then David took this act of kindness. A lady here. If this had not happened, maybe Rizpah would not have been mentioned here. We didn't know that Saul had a concubine called Rizpah. To her, it was a deeply saddening because she had to give up 2 of her sons to be hanged. But because of her love, because of her kindness, even David heard. And then David took another act of kindness. In order to settle the plague, not only should we find out the root cause, we also need to take act of kindness, and then blessings will come once again. Another, the second paragraph, verse 15 to 22. So it's a list of David's mighty men. So most likely they fought against the Philistines to show how mighty they were. So David and his servants with him went down and fought against the Philistines, and David grew faint. Verse 15. He did not dodge from fighting, but he grew faint. And David grew faint. Verse 15. So there was a giant, Ishbi-Benob, He wanted to kill David. So he had this bronze spear was 300 shekels, bearing a new sword. Maybe just he killed people with the old sword and then the old sword broke. Or maybe he's a new recruit. That's why he had got a new sword. But then he had the 300 shekels heavy of bronze spear. But Abijah, the son of Zeruiah, came to his aid and struck the Philistine and killed him. Wow, Abijah was quite a mighty man. So he killed the giant Ishbi. That's why he was always with David, Abijah. Even though Abijah always said the wrong thing, he was very impulsive. But David highly regarded him. Because when David was in danger, Abijah came to his aid and struck down the Philistine. So then the man of David swore to him, saying, "You shall go out no more with us to battle, lest you quench the lamp of Israel." Verse 17. So it should have happened before the events of Absalom. Because when they actually defeated the Philistines, then they had peace in his territory. And then afterwards, they fought against the Ammonites. That's why David did not go out. Because of this, that's why David, do not go out with us anymore, lest you quench the lamp of Israel. David was the lamp of Israel. Be your king. Then you will light up the whole nation. If the lamp of Israel was quenched, we don't know what to do. It was really positive. But then David made mistakes because he didn't go out. And he used all kinds of ways to cover up that matter, the murder and the adultery. That his adultery with Bathsheba, and even killed the husband of Bathsheba. Was he the lamp of Israel? He didn't go out to war, but he did not light up the Israel. He even covered up the truth, the fact. And then 3 mighty men mentioned in this chapter as well. So, and in verse 18, Shibika, and he killed Saph, who was one of the sons of the giants. Verse 18. So they are sons of the giants. That means they are giants. Chinese versions call them giants. So when we talk about giants, they should be great. They are giants, but the Chinese means they are great. So it's a bit confusing for the Chinese translation. Verse 19, there was a Bethlehemite, Elhanan, the son of the Bethlehemites. He killed the brother of Goliath, the Gittite. Goliath was killed by David, so he killed the brother of Goliath. Few possibilities. In 2 Chronicles, there was a remark. He killed the brothers of Goliath. But I think no need to think like there is no need to think like that. There could be the second, the third Goliath. They are all descendants of the giants. That's why we still have a lot of. We have few David in our church for sure. Few Davids. So we shouldn't be bothered by this, whether it's Goliath or his brothers or whatever. And then there was another man of great stature, verse 20. There was a man of great stature who had 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot, 24 in number. And he was also born to the giant. And then Jonathan, the son of Shimeah, killed him. The 4 giants of the Philistines were people of Gath, and they both fell by the hand of David and by the hand of his servants. Verse 22. On one hand, it talks about the famine in the territory of Israel, and at the one, talk about how they fought against the enemy. And David was able to settle these 2 matters. With kindness, he repay evil, hatred with kindness. Then God heeded the prayer of man. You could say that it was David who ruled over Israel, but it was actually the Lord God who reigned over Israel. Everyone who sits on the throne was only an agent, a representative, an anointed king of the Lord. The spirit of the sovereign Lord will be upon that person. He needed to rule over the whole nations in the spirit of God. So we need to understand the kings of Israel in this way. Is the representative of God, chosen by God, anointed by God to exercise power. Thank God, you and I are anointed ones. Anointed one in Hebrew means Christ. And then in Hebrew, in Messiah, anointed one. Today you and I are called Christian. Little Christ, because we are anointed by the Holy Spirit, chosen by God. We will arise, we will raise up by Him, and to become a lamp wherever we are. God delights to heed our prayer. That's the end of our message today. Let's arise and worship our God.